From Washington, this is VOA News. Cypriot leader says bailout terms painful but necessary. Secretary Kerry says Washington Afghan ally on same page. I'm Bill Michaels reporting from Washington. Cyprus President Nicos Anastasiades says the terms of his country's new $13 billion bailout are painful, but that he had to agree to the deal with international lenders to keep the island nation from economic collapse.
Οι ώρες ήταν δύσκολες. Σε κάποιες στιγμές ήταν δραματικές.
In a televised speech to his country Monday night, Mr. Anastasiades said our choices were not easy. He said that at banks on the Mediterranean island capital, restrictions will be imposed to prevent depositors from making massive cash withdrawals, but he said the restrictions would be very temporary. Most of those banks were due to reopen today, but now all will remain closed until Thursday. Banks in Cyprus have been closed for more than a week during the crisis, and the size of withdrawals by customers at automated teller machines has been limited. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry says Washington is on the same page with its Afghan allies when it comes to peace talks with the Taliban.
We also support the Afghan-led peace process, the reconciliation, recognizing that reconciliation is the best way to try to provide the surest end to violence and to secure a unified and a sovereign Afghanistan.
Mr. Kerry made his comments Monday alongside Afghan President Hamid Karzai in Kabul. The top U.S. diplomat had arrived on an unannounced visit earlier in the day. Mr. Kerry said he was confident President Karzai does not believe the U.S. has any interest except to see the Taliban come to the table to make peace. Earlier this month, President Karzai made headlines when he suggested that Washington and the Taliban were colluding against Afghanistan, a claim the United States and NATO strongly condemned. The United Nations is moving about half of its 100 foreign staff in Syria out of the country because of escalating violence. UN officials said Monday that as part of the new measures, most of the Damascus-based international staff of UN Arab League envoy Lakhdar Brahimi will be relocated to Cairo and Lebanon. The remaining national staff of roughly 800 have been asked to work from home. Syria's capital has come under heavy bombardment over the past several days. The U.S. Justice Department has unsealed the indictment and guilty plea of what the government calls a senior Somali terrorist leader captured in 2011 for supplying weapons to two al-Qaeda-linked groups. Ahmed Warsame, a Somali national, pleaded guilty to 9 counts and faces life in prison. U.S. Attorney Preet Bharara called his capture 2 years ago and subsequent plea deal a major victory for the United States. The ousted president of the Central African Republic has fled to Cameroon as rebels who overthrew him named a new head of state and pledged to hold elections within 3 years. Gabe Joslow is in Nairobi and filed this report for VOA.
Officials in the rebel coalition Seleka say they plan to install a government in CAR after driving President Francois Bozize from the capital, Bangui. One of the Seleka leaders, Michel Jotodia, a former civil servant turned rebel commander, says he will declare himself interim president in the meantime. The group also pledged to honor aspects of a peace agreement signed in January, including keeping the appointed opposition prime minister and holding elections in 2 to 3 years. 13 South African soldiers stationed in CAR were killed during fighting with Seleka rebels. South African President Jacob Zuma announced the deaths Monday. Gabe Joslow, Nairobi.
Tibetan sources say another person has set himself on fire in western China in an apparent protest against Chinese rule in ethnic Tibetan areas. The source says that the 43-year-old burned himself to death Monday. They say there was little left of the body when locals discovered it in the late morning. More than 100 Tibetans have self-immolated since 2009 to protest what they say is Chinese repression of their culture. China denies the charges and says the suicide protests are acts of terrorism. The U.S. Supreme Court begins hearing arguments later today in two separate cases that could decide whether same-sex marriage will be the law of the land. For more on these stories and a complete look at today's news, visit voanews.com. Reporting from Washington, Bill Michaels, VOA News.